Hi everyone, this is Aaliyah, spiritual astrologer. I'm going to be starting a rising sign series, and what I'm going to start off with is Cancer ascendants, Cancer risings. I find Cancer risings to be one of the more interesting ascendant signs to have, and so I wanted to delve into that. What makes them so special? What makes them unique? What makes them very beautiful? And what makes them so magnetic to the rest of the world? So for starters, what is our rising sign, our ascendant sign, rather, in astrology? So our rising sign is the lens through which we see the world, what colors our impression of our environment, how others see us, how we appear at first impression, our mask, essentially, that we put on when we encounter new people and new situations. So it's not exactly who we are truly. That's more so our sun sign, and even more so our moon sign. But our rising sign is very important, just because however you approach living, however you see the world, if you find the world to be a scary place, if you find the world to be a place to take on challenges, if you find the world to be a place to dream, if you that's all going to be determined by your rising sign and whatever planet dominates that rising sign. So it is interesting, especially when you are first meeting someone. You want to know how you come across. Say you work in a public sector and you're just interested in how your impression is when you first meet people. It can really help you to know your rising sign, just because of that very reason. Just because it would help in new situations. You already know yourself very well, so you know how you may come across, and maybe you'll try to enhance that quality about yourself, or maybe you'll try to regress it a little bit, just because you know it could come across as being very aloof or very, just depending on what sign it's in. So Cancer risings are really interesting because their physical appearance, first of all, is very unique. There's a certain ease and dreaminess about the eyes, particularly in the women. It comes across as a very vulnerable look in the eyes. You look at celebrity examples like Lisa Bonet and Jenny Slate and Natalia Dyer. These are actresses, and just what that looks like in their eyes. Their eyes come across as just being very dreamy, Sharon Tate. And there's a certain softness and vulnerability in their eyes where it looks like they're sad all the time. Or at the very least, they just look very, very interesting. So it's going to be very intriguing to people, because they're like, what is up with that person? They seem so sad. Or, oh, she's so precious, she's so sweet. And for the men, as opposed to that dreaminess, that dreamy, sleepy kind of look, the men have more of an ease about them in their face. So you look at people like Tony Curtis and Marvin Gaye, The Weeknd, and John Travolta, Ben Affleck, and Robert De Niro. These are all people who have Cancer risings. These are all men who have Cancer risings, and there's a certain similarity in all of their eyes. There is a sort of softness, but there's mostly just an ease about them. The women tend to look more vulnerable than the men do. The men just tend to look more inviting. They don't look aggressive at all, but they just have a certain ease about them. You can tell they're very cool people, very cool, even-tempered people. That's the impression that they give with just how they look in their eyes. They also tend to have rounder faces. If their faces aren't round, there's a certain heart shape to them, or a lot of collagen in their face, just very plushy kind of faces. A softness to their features. They may have more wider noses than other rising signs. For instance, a Capricorn rising, they tend to have more straighter noses in appearance, but a Cancer rising's nose is going to be very, very cute, very pudgy, a little bit wider. And if it's not the nose, and it's just going to be their face in general, just a certain heart-shaped face, or just a wider, more fat or fuller face. And that's just the physical manifestation of the moon. They are children of the moon. That is their dominant planet. I say in quotations because obviously the moon is not a planet, but you know what I mean. And so they tend to have that appearance of very moon-like features, the softness, the dreaminess. The moon makes us dream. The moon controls our moods and, affects the tides of water on the earth. And so those people who are Cancer risings, which is a very dominant placement to have Cancer in, it's in, if you have any sign in your sun, moon, and ascendant, those are pretty strong placements. So for you to have a Cancer rising, Cancer is pretty strong in your chart just because it's the one sign, the one aspect of your chart, the rising sign, which is very reflective of your outward appearance. So it is a pretty important part of your chart. And so it is going to come across in how you look and how you appear to others. Now, temperament and personality wise, upon first impressions, a Cancer rising is definitely the people in a party that sit off to themselves. They don't come across as standoffish, though. They have a very open and very inviting maternal or paternal presence that makes people gravitate towards them. Like, even the life of the party might end up bringing the party to their section of the party. Their section might be full of other homebodies that want to create a warmer, more intimate atmosphere within the larger space. So they are very shy and withdrawn in new situations and around new people. If you can imagine, this Cancer symbol is the crab. So think about a crab. What does a crab do when a crab is afraid? A crab would retreat, or they tend to be very withdrawn. So they're like a crab when they're afraid. They tend to be very withdrawn, very shy. There's a certain sweetness to them. And I say that because, like I said before, they're not standoffish, even though they're quiet as a first impression. They're not like closed off. They're just like, they're quiet and they look like they want to talk to someone. They're just not going to be the person who strikes up the conversation. So it's very interesting because people tend to be drawn to them because they have this very inviting energy and a certain sweetness to them. Like, they'll be nice to you, or they feel like home. They feel so comforting. And so they immediately bring their heart to new situations and people. And they feel compassion and understanding for people, like, as a first impression, as opposed to like seeing the worst in someone. For instance, like someone who has perhaps an Aries rising might judge people negatively off the first impression. However, a Cancer rising might see the good in someone when they first meet them immediately. And they were probably the least judgmental people when they first meet someone. And people feel this and get the vibe that they know them or that they're comfortable with them really, really fast. They make people around them comfortable as quickly as possible because they tend to need that themselves in new environments rather quickly. So, for instance, if they're at a party or a work event, they may want to feel comfortable. They may feel nervous. First of all, it's a bunch of new people. They'd rather be at home. This is like out of their comfort zone, right? Being in this public sphere with all these people where you're supposed to be networking and talking to everybody. So what they would do is they would probably find one person, for instance, where they kind of will gravitate towards them, or have that person gravitate towards them by striking up a conversation or just being near them enough to, or being inviting enough to them to where that person would talk to them. And they would probably just stay in the corner with, them, and other people will probably just come to the Cancer risings area, and they'll make it like a home environment, like, as they're talking to like your sister or your brother, and even in a place full of strangers, they'll create a nucleus of comfort and of closeness with a smaller group of people. That is a Cancer rising. So if you're ever at a party or a large space, it will be interesting to try to guess people's rising signs, because that would be really easy, I feel like, to spot a Cancer rising over any other rising sign because of that. They also tend to attract protector types, people who want to protect them because they appear so sensitive and vulnerable. But it's just how they approach new situations. Obviously, our rising sign is not exactly who we are. It's just how we approach new environments and new people. So it's not exactly who we are. Even if you are a Leo as a sun, you're a Leo sun, you are confident as they come. However, when you first walk into a room, you're not feeling like that. You may not come across as a Leo. Someone might look at you and be like, I would never guess you were a Leo. That's so crazy. You seem so quiet. You seem so shy. I thought Leos were so fun and so vivacious. And you might think in your head, like, okay, well, you're going to have to get to know me. So you get to know me. That's exactly how I am. But like, you just can't. Your rising sign is it's our mask. Like, you physically just cannot bring yourself to really act like that. It would have to be very, very conscious effort to try to appear otherwise. So if you are a Cancer rising, no matter what your sun sign is, no matter what your Mercury is, when you're in a new environment, you do not look like you are, just a vivacious personality or bright personality. You just seem very, very kind of shy, a little bit vulnerable. And so people may want to protect you and say, oh, look at that, look at that girl, look at that boy over there. He seems like so like sweet. Like, you could tell like he wants to like, hang out, but he just looks so shy. Let's go talk to him. They're very magnetic in that sense. They tend to attract people who perhaps are life of the party people, or tend to attract people who just want to protect vulnerable people or things. And Cancer risings, they tend to love this protection, especially in romantic partners. A stable Capricornian partner that gives them structure, because that appearance of strength is something that they just cannot show. So because even if they are a really strong person, they don't appear that way. And because they don't appear that way, they tend to love meeting people who are very protective, who are very strong in the physical manifestation of the word, and also protective, And so as humans, we love to see our opposite in a partner. So whatever we find we lack, the universe will find a way to make whole by filling those characteristics in through relationships. So these people come across as compassionate, empathetic, nurturing, sensitive, moody, and as homebodies, and just very comforting souls, and their presence evokes that. And so they're going to attract people who are the complete opposite, who may not be nurturing, who may be a little bit more protective, maybe like a little bit more strong in their stance. And they tend to love that because it's a perfect balance. It's who they might truly be, based on the rest of their chart. But they know that in new environments and new situations, they do not come across that way. They know they're a little bit vulnerable looking, and so they want the complete opposite in a partner or in a friend. Now, who will a Cancer rising clash with? They might clash with fire sign risings. So like a Leo, Sagittarius, Aries rising. If you're a Cancer rising, you might kind of clash with them, at least upon first meeting. So you may have a friend who has an Aries rising and you're a Cancer rising, and you guys may be the best of friends now, but you probably laugh about when you guys first met and how you guys felt about each other, because, a fire sign coming into a Cancer rising's, space, being very loud, or, just a little bit aggressive, a little bit, too blunt, not sensitive, they may have a clash of personalities. Even if that Cancer rising has a Leo Mercury, they might be able to like them eventually, but they just can't have someone around them that comes on too strong at a first meeting. And also an air sign ascendant, for instance, might come across as standoffish. Air signs are known for being a little bit more reserved in their expression of their emotions. So an air sign rising, someone who comes across as that, they might, come across as being very, very close-minded, very standoffish, and that would clash with the Cancer rising. Even though Cancer risings are quiet at first, they have such a warmth and openness that attracts people, whereas air sign risings are unconsciously or consciously hoping to repel people. So they might seem disinterested with new people. They'd rather just be alone. They do really, really well by themselves. In new environments, they'd rather just be alone and fill a place out first. And so a Cancer rising, they obviously would not mesh well, because they might not even have any conversation at all, because one of them is, trying to start a conversation. One of them is repelling that. They just will feel like this air sign ascendant is, disinterested, and it's an obvious clash of personalities with the Cancer rising. Now, career-wise, the first impression someone might have of someone as a Cancer rising is that they're a teacher or a nurse or someone in the healing profession, even an artist. There's this watery vibe that comes across, like you're in between worlds when someone first meets you, because with that crop energy, you really are. You are protective of yourself and willing to wait it out to make sure a space or a person are safe enough. But just as quickly, you will retreat when you sense danger or disinterest. Your rising sign is how you come across. So people might get the sense that you're very sensitive in this way, and therefore have a career that reflects that. Signs that you may have seen in this video are Lisa Bonet. I feel like she's the perfect representation of a Cancer rising, because when she was younger, first of all, she's a Scorpio sun. Okay, now you kind of grow into your sun sign, and we'll do videos on sun signs later on, but you grow into your sun sign. So her being a Scorpio sun, she's obviously in her I believe, mid to late 50s. She is an older, mature woman, and therefore she knows herself very well at this point, theoretically. So therefore she looks like a Scorpio. When you see her, I feel like you don't really see the Cancer rising anymore, because she just genuinely looks like a Scorpio, like she just, has fully come into herself. That's my impression. Now, when she was younger, in her 20s, when she was actually at the peak, on the apex of her fame, she appeared in the Cosby Show. And that's where all, pictures and footage, come from, of Lisa Bonet, usually come from that era when she was most popular in popular media. And you can just see that her facial features were so beloved, and they still are beloved, and they get reposted all the time. Just Lisa Bonet just was known for being so beautiful, and she was known for being very spiritual at a young age, and she had that dreaminess about her eyes, like the most doughy eyes, just so beautiful. Her daughter Zoe Kravitz, they look so similar, but they look so different because Zoe has a different rising sign, and she does not have the softer features that Lisa has. She kind of resembles her father Lenny, with stronger features, like a little sharper jawline, that kind of thing. And she has more cat-like eyes, as opposed to her mother, who has a doe softer, dreamy look. And also Natalia Dyer, who has, to me, the most beautiful eyes in show business. I think that her eyes evoke so much emotion. I would imagine her being a very moody person, a very emotional person, just because with her acting and her roles, especially her most famous role on Stranger Things, playing Nancy Wheeler, she has this look about her where she looks like she can evoke any emotion. And she seems to be a very intense woman. She's a young woman, and she just has a very intense presence. Doesn't do much media. However, every time you see her on screen, or every time you see her in an interview, she just seems like a very quiet, withdrawn person. She seems like she's very intense, very, very deep on her outward personality. But that's just that Cancer rising coming through. And then you have people like Jill Scott, who also has a fuller face and that softness about her features. Is known for being very vivacious and also very spiritual as well. Shailene Woodley has that softness, and she also has a very spiritual reputation. I feel like there's a commonality with that spirituality and that spiritual connection with Cancer risings as well, because they're in that watery essence. They have that connection to the other realm, that spiritual realm, where God resides, where whatever you believe in, resides, that other frequency that's not of the earth. Water signs in really big placements like sun, moon, rising tend to have a very deep connection to that realm, because they allow themselves to dream, they allow themselves to fly, and they're not so, like a Taurus, for instance, is very stuck on this earth plane in terms of their consciousness, the way of thinking. There are a lot of Tauruses who are really, really scared of death that I know of, and it's because they feel so connected to the earth. They don't really often think of spiritual matters as often or as deeply as someone who would be a Scorpio, dominant person, or a Cancer dominant person. That connection to arts and spirituality is just not going to be there as strong. And so there is typically a commonality with a connection to faith or spirituality, typically not a traditionally spiritual person. So like someone who goes to church, that may not be a Cancer rising person. They may tend to go for a more deeper, more, I guess you could say, visceral feeling of spirituality, where it's more of the spirit of the body as opposed to of a traditional book, traditional history. And so, there are people like Farrah Fawcett and Jenny Slate, who, we know to be spiritual people. There's people like The Weeknd, the artist The Weeknd, who makes music, and, just they're very creative people, and they tend to see the world in that light. And so their physical manifestation will come out because they are being who they see the world as. So they may see the world as a place to dream, a place to ascend, a place to connect, in order to connect with other people, in order to connect with that higher spiritual power. And so it comes across in physical appearance, and they tend to be more withdrawn in new environments, because They know that they're sensitive to energies, and they probably love very, very hard. They know Cancers are very homey, very family oriented, very deep individuals. And so a Cancer dominant person, someone who's a Cancer rising, they may connect with people very easily, and so they tend to be very careful of who they connect to, and they probably like to practice discernment from a very young age, because you can get caught up in a lot of stuff if you end up being in an environment with people and they have negative energy, or they influence you to do negative things if you are a sensitive spirit. So this was my take on Cancer risings. Let me know your impression of being a Cancer rising. What is your experience if that is your rising sign? What is your impression of people in your life who are Cancer risings, people you know really well? What was your first impression of them? And what is different now that you perhaps spend more time with their sun sign manifestation, now they've gotten to know you and allow you to see who they truly are? What did you find the difference to be too alarming? Is Cancer being their rising sign, was their sun sign something totally different, like Leo, where it's a completely opposite energy? And did you find that to be a little bit alarming, just to find out that the person was completely different from what they appeared to be? And if you have any questions, definitely leave them below. I am a spiritual astrologer, which is basically an astrologer who finds the common thread of spirituality in astrology. For instance, being able to connect certain life missions and purpose to our individual birth charts, and helping people and guiding people is something that I do for fun and for a living. If you go on my website, I will leave a link below. If you'd like me to do an intensive reading on your birth chart, I can help you to find your purpose, will be the best manifestation of your individual gifts, your strengths, some things you may have to work on, in your chart and your personality, that would help you to reach your maximum potential. So I will do a deep dive with you. We go really, really hard. It does cost money. It's not expensive to me, but the price is what it is, because we do a really, really deep dive, and you get a lot of knowledge of self from those readings. So if you're interested in that, book with me below. If you're interested in wearing some spiritual intentional t-shirts, you go ahead and look at my website, spiritualastrologersbyas.com. You can shop there and wear some shirts that kind of represent how you feel inside. They represent who you are. We have some planet dominant shirts as well, that you can rock if you know your dominant planet and you feel a connection to people with the same dominant planet. And also, we have a spiritual astrologer t-shirt that I love, because it helps people to, anyone who reads it would understand, or they would look into spiritual astrology and its benefits for all of mankind, and our interpersonal relationships, and how we all relate to each other and ourselves. So thank you for watching. I will definitely be doing more of these rising sign videos. They're very quick. There's not much to discuss with rising signs, because they're not who we truly are, but they are fun to see and unveil the mask that we do put on in new environments. So leave a comment below, and thanks for watching. Bye.